Welcome everybody to this webinar on the PPWR regulation. Bienvenue dans ce webinaire sur le règlement PPWR, décryptage des enjeux et des risques associés. This webinar will be conducted on English language. And so for the organization, a few details. Make sure your computer's volume is set correctly when providing for the questions and answers, and by default your microphone is on mute. So feel free on the last part of this webinar to put on your questions on the question tab. At the end, all the speakers will provide some answers to the questions that you have. I will start with a brief introduction of myself. My name is Luis Rodriguez. I am a chemistry expert at Mérieux Nutrisciences in France for about 3 years. I occupy myself mostly about the contaminants part and providing scientific support to our customers. I also am responsible for the hosting the webinars and providing formation and consulting services. I will ask Francesca Faraon to introduce herself.
Thanks, Luis. Good morning, everybody. I'm Francesca Faraon, and I work as a product manager, environmental and packaging in Mérieux Nutrisciences Italia. So I work directly with our packaging hub, and it's 10 years that I'm in Mérieux Nutrisciences. I leave the floor to my colleague Stefano to introduce himself.
Thank you, Francesca. I'm Stefano Scomparin. I'm a senior regulatory expert in food contact material, and I'm based, as Francesca, in Italy. And I work with several industries, both from packaging producer, food companies, and so on, in order to check the regulatory mandatory aspect and compliance, and help the company to check and to satisfy all the requirements of the legislation in force. I leave the floor to Luis.
Thank you, Stefano. So, as it was summarized in the advertising for this webinar, we will start with a brief introduction to the packaging world. Then Francesca will make an overview of the PPWR regulation. And at the end, Stefano will deep dive on the safety-related consequences and how to prevent the safety concerns on the packaging. And then we will conclude with a question and answer session. So for the introduction to the packaging world, I would like to set the basis with the texts that are the cornerstones of the packaging regulation. For example, the regulation 1935 of 2004, also called the Framework Regulation. So here we will have the general requirements that are necessary for the compliance of packaging. Then we have the regulation 2023 of 2006, which will establish the good manufacturing practices. The regulation on the PPWR of packaging and packaging waste regulation will be a supplementary and complementary regulation that we will build upon all the previous that I mentioned. There are also other regulations that are specific to certain materials, such as Regulation 10/2011, that is specific to plastic food contact materials. So these regulations are called harmonized, which means they are all applicable at the European level. There are other texts, for example, national recommendations that are specific to each member state, which means to each European country. For example, for paper and board, we have a French recommendation. For cork and ink, we may have international international guidelines. And also for inks, we may have a Swiss ordinance. And for silicone elastomers, we may have a national guideline on France. So upon the regulation 2019-515, we have the principle of mutual recognition, which states that a food contact material compliant with a national recommendation in France should be recognized by the authorities in other member states, for example, in Italy. So the takeaway on this slide is that the framework regulation and the good manufacturing practices established the principles and the safety of the packaging. And the PPWR will, for the most part, target the sustainability and the environmental concerns of the packaging. In concerning the safety of the packaging, we have the national French control on food contact materials conducted by the DGCCRF, the Directorate General for Competition Policy, Consumers Affairs, and Fraud Control in France. So around 1,300 establishments were inspected, and a total of 375 food contact materials were tested in 2021. We can also see that there was a 20% anomaly rate. For example, bisphenol A traces were identified in recycled packaging made of paper and carton board, which resulted in withdrawals from the market, in RAS alerts, and also some phthalates exceedances regarding migration limits were verified in cardboard pizza boxes. More concerning was the absence of the mandatory documentations, the declaration of compliance by some food industry players. Other non-compliances concerned claims such as bisphenol A-free or PFOA-free or other environmental claims. There was also the highlighting by the French national authorities that very few checks on migration tests, regulatory verifications, and also regular self-checks by the FCM importers and the first introducer of the packaging on the French market. So on the conclusion, the food industry is not always familiar with the regulations. This is a concern because the PPWR will get in place in the next year, and with plenty of deadlines to be respected, which will complicate and complexify the situation. The regulation called the framework regulation is very strict and more targeted on the safety related concerns on packaging. For example, in their Article 3, the packaging should not make the migration in quantities that should not endanger human health, that should not alter the composition of the food, and should not implicate the deterioration of the organoleptic characteristics. Alongside, we have the obligation to have a declaration of compliance for each food contact material. So in this way, we will be protected from the national controls. However, this is not enough to comply with the PPWR regulation, which is a very different regulation that will not repeal in any way this regulation. What we are going to see right now is the pillars for the sustainability, which are various, and We will invite each company to focus on a calendar, on a pathway, and not addressing all the issues at once, because the issues are too many. I will leave the floor to Francesca.
Thank you, Luis. I'm going to share my screen. And as you said well, the PPWR came like really a revolution for the world of packaging, but also for the world of food manufacturers. It was issued at the beginning of this year, and it replaces the previous directive of the 94 on packaging and packaging waste. The aim of the European Commission was to reduce the generation of packaging waste, to promote the circular economy, and also to promote the use of recycled content in packaging. It had a long, not long, but maybe complicated path. It was first issued in 2022 as a draft, with a long debate also from industries, from lobbies, also from the European Commission. And in 2025, at the beginning of the years, we had the European Regulation number 40. The main pillars are that it is applied to all packaging, that it contains a design for recycling as a very important principle, that includes an harmonized EPR, extended producer responsibility concept, and that it sets mandatory targets on reuse, recycling, and recycled content. Now, the PPWR is not really already applicable as it is, because we need some delegated acts to come, some new norms to be issued. But it's also true that the pillars are present, and it's important for each packaging producers, but also for each food company, to do a sort of assessment of the position in which it is of this path. The path is not so long, as you can see, as the deadlines are really very near. The first deadlines in 2026, you see, are about safety of packaging. There is a deadline on limitations in food content packaging of PFAS and metals. These issues of safety will be deeper explained by my colleague Stefano. I will focus on the main pillars of sustainability that you see in green. There are some deadlines for the producers, including the minimum recycled content, the recyclability, the compostability. But there are also some deadlines for the working groups to set the guidelines. You see that the JRC and also the CEN are working to set the recyclability rates, or to say which are the guidelines of design for recycling. So companies has to know from now that there will be economic incentives for recyclability, because there will be from 2030 a unique extended producer responsibility system. Now they are different in all Europe, and the concept will be that higher fees will be put for packaging that is difficult to recycle, and lower fees for packaging that meets high recyclability standards. We will see some of the main pillars. Looking at the main articles on recyclability, it's true that we can decide to go directly to the deadline, or to better understand it, to better assess our packaging, if we are going to decide to change something, and be prepared for the deadlines that you see are not so far away. The first article I wanted to highlight is the number 6 on recyclability. You see that the main concept is that all packaging has to be designed for recycling from 2030 and recyclable at scale from 2035. The difference between these two concepts is that design for recycling is that the packaging has to be well designed, ideally created for being recycled. And recyclable at scale means that physically, when the packaging becomes a waste, it has to be recycled because it exists a collection method, a recycling plant, but also a market for the recycled materials. Now, what can we do? We already have paper recyclability tests that are valid at the European level, like the SEPI method and Forever Green evaluation. We have also some private schemes for plastic recyclability. So it's already possible to assess the recyclability of plastic and paper. Probably this method will inspire the future guidelines that will come out after the PPWR with the secondary legislation and the delegated acts. Another article that is one of the main pillars is the number 7 on recycled content. It's applicable only to plastic packaging that shall contain a minimal percentage of recycled content. You see that we have deadlines for single-use plastic beverage bottles and deadlines for the food contact plastic with the PET as a major or as a minor component. We focus on PET because you know that now EFSA has approved some recycling scheme for PET. So it's more easy to have PET, recycled PET as a component than other sort of plastics. When speaking about recycled content, the first question that you have in mind is recycled packaging safe? It will be very important after the process of recycling is approved, also to do some checking on the typical contaminants of the recycled materials with migration tests, NIAS screening, verification of the barrier effects. Another important article is about compostability, the number 9. The items that are included and focused in this article are permeable tea, coffee or beverages, bags and capsules, the sticky labels for fruit and vegetables, and also the very lightweight plastic carrier bags. They should be compostable. With this article and with the PPWR, the single-serve units coffee and tea are considered packaging. So if they are permeable, they have to be industrial compostable according to the international standards, and if requested by member states, with the domestic composting standards. If these capsules and bags are not permeable, they have to meet the design criteria for recycling because they are considered as packaging, plastic packaging or other sort of materials. They have to respect these criteria. So from now, it's possible to understand if your packaging is compostable thanks to the standard that we had. We know that the standards on compostability will be revised, but it's also true that they will inspire the next standards. So if you are thinking to change your packaging into compostable one, it could be interesting to certify it with the industrial compostability standards or home compostability according to the case, or to check, for example, that the quality of product didn't change if you change the packaging, thanks to, for example, shelf life studies. Other important articles are about the packaging minimization, the 10 and 24. This aims to have a packaging that is not too big. So no overpackaging is really the message of this article. It's in particular applied for now to the e-commerce packaging, where the empty space ratio will be 50% maximum. And it's well written that double walls, false bottoms, unnecessary layers has to be revised. And a specific standard for the empty food space ratio will come out soon. In the meantime, if you decide to go on this way of reducing your packaging, surely you have to pay attention to the resistance of your packaging. So all the physical characteristics of your packaging, to verify the thickness and to verify any possible consequence of the packaging minimization to the quality of your food. Other two important articles are about the communication on your packaging. The first is the mandatory environmental labeling in Article 12. You know that in this moment, I'm thinking about France, about Italy, we have mandatory environmental labeling on our packaging. They are different in all European countries. The aim of this article is to have a uniform situation in all Europe, fighting against the misleading, confusing labels, but above all, giving information about waste management. In this way, we can improve the differential collection of waste and so the recycling. We have to say that now we are in a phase of stakeholder consultation, that the delegated acts that will explain how this common labeling will work will come out next year in August. It will be compulsory to use the new labeling from August 28, and there will be additional indication for reusability, recycled content, bio-based and compostable materials to be put on the packaging in February 29. The other side of the communication for PPWR are the claims that are explicated in Article 14. I mean the environmental self-declared claims that in the PPWR it's well written. They have also to look at the green claim and greenwashing directives that well explain how to deal with this sort of environmental claims. The important thing is that they don't have to be used if they promote something that is equal to the PPWR requirement. So only if it's something exceeding this. For example, if we are in the year when the content of 30% of recycled plastic is compulsory, you can't write on your bottle it contains the 30% of recycled plastic, only if it exceeds the minimum requirements. All the claims have to be scientifically proven with a particular methodology and calculation rules that have to be in common, that have to be scientific and recognized. So, in support of this, all the standards on the environmental self-declared claims like the ISO 1440 or 1420 groups come to help us. All the studies of LCA and product footprint, and the lab studies to support the green claims, for example. Another important pillar is on reusable packaging and refillable packaging. You see on your left the reuse targets for 2030 that involve in particular the transport, the distribution, and the beverage packaging. On the other side, we have obligations also for the refill. Refill is interesting in particular for the HoReCa, for the beverages and food takeaway. In a couple of years, it will be compulsory to organize a refill system for the HoReCa, to inform the customers, and also to offer the consumers the possibility to opt for those reusable packaging. So we have to create this area. In particular, there are also obligations for the retailers with a superficial area or more than 400 square meters to set up an area dedicated to food and non-food refill. So when we think about reuse and refill of packaging, we have always the question of the hygiene, so microbiological hygiene, but also the chemical safety. From now, it's possible to use the current standard about the performances of reuse system. There is EN 13429, so it's possible to be used. In the future, we are waiting for some guidelines, but if you are thinking from now to a reusable and refillable packaging, you have to take it into consideration to analyze the contaminants migration in repeated use, to test the resistance, for example, in washing machine after many washing cycles, or to look at the odors persistence after the use with the scalping analysis, or at last, the evaluation of microbiological condition after reuse, for example. The last article I would like to highlight, it's the number 67, sorry. It's about the amendments to the single-use plastic regulation. In the PPWR, they decided to give new market restrictions on the single-use plastics. Some examples are these. For example, the plastic packaging that gathers together a group of goods in the supermarkets, or the single-use plastic packaging for fruit and vegetables when the weight of fruit and vegetable is less than 1.5 kilograms, or the very lightweight plastic carrier bags, or the single-use plastic packaging that you use for foods and beverage in individual servings, like the individual servings for condiments, coffee creamers, sauces that you find in Horeca. And then the single-use packaging that are typically present in the hotels for hygiene and toiletry. So now we have an overview of the main articles on sustainability, but we have to underline that there is a very important article also on food contact safety, the number 5. And all the implication of this will be better explained by my colleague, Stefano. Stefano, I leave you the floor.
Thank you, Francesca, for this overview of the main requirements of the regulation PPWR. And in this final section of this webinar, I will talk about the safety concern and the safety implication of this new regulation PPWR. I want to start with the PFAS, but I have to move forward just to better understand on what kind of substances we are talking about. PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, has been produced and manufactured since the 1940s, and we are talking about a class of substances of more than 10,000 different molecules. So PFAS are persistent contaminants, also called forever contaminants, because in the structure of the molecules, there is the presence of the fluorine-carbon bond, which is extremely difficult to degrade in human and in the environment. And so PFAS has been widely used in several industrial applications thanks to their odor repellents and stability properties. And at the moment, it has been demonstrated several contaminations also in environment, in particular in the water. But the authorities and in several studies has been performed to demonstrate that not only water are contaminated, but also other environmental matrices, for example, air and soil. So where we can find these kind of chemicals. At the moment, it has been demonstrated that these substances could be found in several matrices, starting from water and also wastewater or other waste, including also other environmental matrices, as I said before, soil and air. But it has been demonstrated that it could be present also in the food and also in the packaging. And in this slide, we can see, in this picture, we can see a study performed by Le Monde with 7 other partners, which has investigated this contamination about these chemicals. And you can see the red dots, which for which represent sites for which the contamination has been demonstrated, and we are talking about 23,000 red dots. And in this slide, you see also the blue dots, which are for which there is a presumptive contamination, considering that in these sites there is some port activities, or maybe there is a site where which hold companies or an industries with work or manage some PFAS, some chemicals of PFAS, or maybe there is some military activities, and we are talking about 21,500 blue sites, blue dots. So I want to start first of all with the regulatory framework in food, which started in 2010 with asking to collect some data and to make a picture about the situation, the actual situation of the food contamination from these chemicals. And after this collection and evaluation of the data in 2022, the European Commission issued a regulation, the number 2388, regarding the maximum limits of only four chemicals, phosphor, PFNA, and PFHXS, in foodstuff only of animal origins. But also in 2022, the Commission issued a recommendation to monitor other a list of 28 PFAS in several food matrices for the following 4 years. And probably, maybe this monitoring will produce an increasing of a new regulation, a new amendment of the contaminant regulation in food, with an increasing of the PFAS that should be monitored and investigated, maybe also an increasing about the food that should be limited about these chemicals, and maybe also a revision of the actual limitation, the actual reference limitation. And we are still about the RAS portal or alert system. In this year, we saw the authorities has performed the first notification of non-contamination about these chemicals in the foods, for example, in fish, but not only. And in 2023, the European Commission issued the regulation 915, which established the same limitation of the regulation 2388. So if we talk about food contact material, PFAS could be present considering their fat repellent properties, their chemical and thermal stability, and they are either to be used in non-sticky coatings on cookware, or also in rubber and silicones used in items which have to endure the high temperatures. So PFAS could improve the technical properties of food contact materials and their characteristics, and also their potential migration is in function of the type of material for which these chemicals has been used in combination with, and also in the function of the PFAS used and the structure of the PFAS. And in the slide we can see an example of application of PFAS in this case in a paper material, and PFAS, for example, in paper, has been used both internal and external sizing agents and in surface coating. So it could be used in the mass, in the pulp of the paper, but also in some application it has been used as a surface layer, as a coating. And talking about, in particular, in packaging, the use of these chemicals has a strange impact, in particular, considering the end of life of this application. Because if we think about the packaging, in particular, the end of life is very short respect to other application in which PFAS has been usually used. For example, if we think about automotive, agriculture, or microchips and so on, the end of life is very long respect to a packaging. And this is an issue because the continuous use of these chemicals in this application could allow this migration and this contamination in the environment and also in the food contact, in the food package, and also for sure the human's exposure will increase. So in food contact material, PFAS could be both intentionally added and not intentionally added. For example, if we think about the regulation 10/2011 for plastic material in contact with food, we have also some PFAS authorized and listed in Annex 1 of monomers and additives that could be used for the production of plastic material. And we have to know that Regulation 10/2011 do not talk only about package. It talks also about every kind of food contact materials. So, for example, plant of production or other items are dishes or glasses and so on. And so probably in next future, it could be probably that this regulation will be repealed and there could be some modification about the Annex 1. But they could also be present in the food contact material as not intentionally added substances, because considering that the fluorine carbon chain, fluorine carbon bond is difficult to degrade, and their presence in the environment, we could have several ways of contamination. For example, if we think about the production process of a paper, which involves several volumes of water, if this water is contaminated by PFAS, probably this contamination will be transferred also to the final article in paper or in board, or other kind of contamination from environment. Also, if we use raw material contaminated, we for sure will have this contamination also in the final article. And so there are several studies from several it has been performed several evaluations that demonstrate the PFAS, that PFAS are present in food contact materials, and also that they could migrate into food. So migration is proven, and it is conditioned by many boundary factors. Contamination can also occur during the production stage, as I told before, or also during the production stage of the food product. So the contamination of the food could not be caused by the food packaging, but maybe it could be, in some cases, we saw with our experience that the contamination has different factors, or maybe the food was already contaminated before packing. So PFAS are released by hydrolysis, which could be accelerated by the heating. And if we have a material with explicate a barrier effect to these chemicals, of course, the migration will be lower. PFAS could also mostly found in foods rich in protein, and the migration from paper and board to water or to different ethanol solutions is higher when the fluorinated chain is smaller. And finally, the migration of FOS and FOA is higher in acidic food. So how we have to investigate this contamination or this potential presence of these chemicals in a food contact material? As you can see in the left picture, we have several analytical techniques, and they have to move in a situation in which at the moment we have no delegate tests and no universal recognized methodology which could be used from several private or public laboratories or authorities. And so as we see, we have several techniques, and we have to choose the best strategies to check this potential contamination. If we go deeper, we can see in this pyramid, in the top layer, we have the total fluorine, which could be determined with a sample combustion. But the total fluorine for sure are not only PFAS. This group of substances could include also, for example, inorganic fluorine, which for sure are not PFAS, for example, which could be determined in the ash combustion, and the organofluorine. But also the organic fluorine is an overestimation of the total PFAS. And so if we move down to this pyramid, we can perform also the extractable organofluorine, and we can move also to a target PFAS performed, for example, with LCMS-MS in the extract. But at the moment, it could not be possible to determine all the 10,000 PFAS with the target analysis. So what PPWR said about these chemicals? From 12th of August of next year, only food contact packaging, so in this case, for example, cosmetic packaging are not related to this limitation, only at the moment, only for food contact packaging, shall not be placed into market if they contains PFAS. But what is the level for which that we have to refer? 25 parts per billion for each PFAS determined with a target method, excluding the polymeric PFAS, and also 250 parts per billion for the sum of these PFAS measured, including also the prior degradation and also precursors, but also excluding the polymeric PFAS. And we have also limitation about the total fluorine, which is 50 parts per billion. And so if there is the level of total fluorine is higher than 50 parts per million, we have to demonstrate that this value is not related to PFAS. For example, we could perform the determination of total organic fluorine and check if the value will be lower than 50 parts per million. At the moment, there are several working groups working about the definition of PFAS in function of the different field and different application of these chemicals. But if we're thinking about packaging or food contact material, I suggest we may refer to the definition highlighted in the PPWR regulation. And so what is the best strategies to check these potential to check these substances? We suggest two different way, preventional strategies to discover intentionally added PFAS, and also strategies about the investigation to find the not intentionally added PFAS. In particular, we can see we have developed several methodologies with several analytical techniques in order to go deeper about this contamination, this topic. If we think about the prevention of the intentional substances, we could perform the determination of total fluorine, or also the total organic fluorine on the sample as it is, for example, with the oxygen combustion or with ion chromatography. And we can also perform the determination of adsorbable or extractable organic fluorine. The extractable organic fluorine is a requirement, for example, for the Danish legislation for the paper in contact with food. And if we, with these techniques, we can check the potential intentionally added PFAS. And if we want to check the potential contamination, we could perform the determination of target PFAS, including also the fluorotelomers, which are precursors. And also we can perform the determination of the migration, or also the determination of PFAS directly in the food, considering both the regulation that I talked before and also the recommendation. And also we can check all the 28 PFAS in the recommendation in the food. And also we can perform the total oxidizable precursor assay, which could be break the long chain, which is an oxidation that will be break the long chain PFAS, and reduce them to the short chain, which could be determined with the PFAS target method in order to check the limitation of 250 parts per billion as a sum. And in our experience, I can show the positive findings that we have last year. We have 35% of samples which resulted positive, in particular for total fluorine or for some PFAS target. And if we go deeper about the matrices involved, we see that in paper, the 43% of samples were positive and the 33% of plastics were positive. In particular, in paper, we detect several positivities about the PFHXA, which will be ruled also by the PFAS, by the REACH restrictions. We are still proceeding with the extraction of the new data in 2025, and we perform more investigation. More than 1,000 samples has been processed till now, and we have seen a little increase about the positivities, and we are also make some evaluation about the non-compliance, since in 2024 the limitation was not issued by the European Commission, and we find that about 10 or 50% of the positive samples in some cases are also we detected also a value higher than the limitation of the legislation that will come in force in next year. So about the contamination, I've finished to talk about PFAS, but I want to remember that PPWR do not ask to monitor only PFAS. In a previous draft of PPWR, the legislator think also to put a limitation about bisphenol A, but this decision has been repealed, considering that at the end of 2024, the European Commission issued a regulation 3119, which do not allow the use of bisphenol A and also other hazardous bisphenols for the production of food contact materials, not only packaging. But so for these reasons in PPWR at the moment there is no reference about bisphenol A, but we have to consider also the limitation about the heavy metals, in particular the total amount of lead, cadmium, mercury, and hexavalent chromium should not exceed 100 milligram per kilogram, and this limitation is still in force. PPWR limitation for PFAS will become in force in next 12 of August of 2026. But this limitation is still in force, and not only for food package, also for example, cosmetic packaging and so on. And we have to check also this aspect. About the future development, the European Commission requests to the European Chemical Agency, ECHA, to prepare a study report identifying the substances of concern in the packaging. Maybe in the next future, we will have an improve of this Article 5 of PPWR, and will be probably mandatory to check also other chemicals and contaminants. So, in conclusion, PPWR represent a revolution in the packaging world, transforming how producer and consumer approaching the packaging. Its main pillars are clear. Through details will come with the upcoming Delegates Act and new technical norms. Deadlines are approaching fast, starting with the deadlines for the PFAS requirement to 2026, but also 2028 and 2030 for other requirements, leaving a limited time to review, modify, or adopt packaging solution, while maintaining, we have to also consider that we have to maintaining the good food qualities for sure. And now is the right time to start assessing for the packaging suitability and performing a risk assessment based on the main PPWR requirements. And so this was our last slide for this webinar, and I leave the floor to Luis for the question and answer section.
Thank you, Stefano. Now we have 5 minutes for the question and answer session. I will start by myself. So for me, we have this question that is very aligned to the integration of the PPWR with the other existing regulations. And the question is, does PPWR testing concerning the many articles, recyclability, recycled content, compostability, reuse, refill, PFAS safety, metal safety, should be added to the declaration of compliance? And the answer is yes. If a food company, if a food player, if a food company will provide some testing on the recyclability of the paper or of the plastic, if they do some recycled testing to evaluate the percentage of recycled content of plastic packaging, if they do the testing of home compostability or industrial compostability, if they do the testing of the cycles on the washing machine for a reusable plastic, if they perform some testing to evaluate the optimization of minimizing the empty space of packaging, if they test for the PFAS and the metals, they should and they can update the declaration of conformity, stating that they are in line with the new PPWR requests. I will move on to Francesca with a rather complex question, but does a pizza carton usually has a sufficiently recyclable material in order to not have to also offer a reusable packaging? That is, if contains X% of recyclable material, or it is nonetheless necessary to offer reusable packaging?
Thanks for the questions that give me the possibility to touch more points. Starting from the fact that for paper is not required in PPWR recycled content for the moment. So the recycled content, the minimum recycled content is for plastic, as things are now. But for example, a paper pizza box has to be recyclable before by design and later at scale, looking at the deadlines. The only way to understand if it's recyclable is to do the test, because each producer has a different way to produce. It depends from the material, but it depends also from the shape. It's true that the recyclability guidelines are coming, but it's also true that they will very probably based on the method that are existing now with some changes. I mean that if you decide now to test for recyclability your paper box, it will be very probably that it will be recyclable, maybe at a different grade also in the future. So if you assess now the recyclability of your box, you can have an idea from where you are starting and be more ready for the future. If you decide, and it was touched also the fact that it could be reusable, if you decided to do a reusable pizza box, it can be an option. In the Horeca, it's requested for some specific items. You have to take, you have to think that it's important to have a logistic system well done, because you have to think about the reconditioning of the boxes you are going to reuse, and so to do all the testing about the repeated use, the washing test, and also the microbiological safety tests that are all things that have to be guaranteed for reusable packaging. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, Francesca. One last question to Stefano. If the total fluorine level in a food packaging is below 50 ppm, 50 milligram per kilo, does the PPWR allow us to skip targeted PFAS analysis?
Thank you, Luis, for this question. I know that there are several working groups about which are asking to the European Commission if it could be possible to perform only the determination of total fluorine, and if it could be higher than the limitation, it is necessary to perform the target PFAS. Otherwise, it's not necessary. But at the moment, the European Commission do not issue any reference document with this indication. And so we have to consider that 50 part per million is a level to investigate the intentional use of a PFAS. And 25 part per billion or 250 part per billion are the requirements of this level are to investigate the not intentional use of these chemicals. And considering that in our experience, the declaration of not intentional use of PFAS could not be considered enough, because we'd have also to manage the potential contamination. My suggestion and my recommendation is to perform all the analysis to check both the total fluorine, and in case we have a level higher than 50 part per million, to check the total organic fluorine, and in parallel check the determination of the target PFAS, including also fluorotelomers, precursors, and also the determination of top assay to check both the limitation of 25 part per billion for each single PFAS target and 250 part per billion for the sum of these PFAS. I hope to have answered clearly to the question.
Thank you, Stefano. Time is running out, so I would like to thank Francesca and Stefano for joining me on this webinar. And I would like also to thank you, the participants, and we will provide the answers to all the other questions that were not possible to give an answer today. Thank you and have a nice day.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.